Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on e-commerce in Latin America. My name is Abel Delgado. I'm the Digital Marketing Director for America's Market Intelligence, one of the companies that prepared the materials that you're going to be seeing here today, along with Boa Compra. And we're going to be discussing a number of different topics. I'm going to give you a quick overview of what to expect in today's webinar. The first thing to understand is the presentation itself covers ground that lasts about 50 minutes or so. And then after that, we have a space of 10 minutes for questions. So the way to ask a question is pretty simple. If you look on your participant panel, you should be able to see a number of different icons. One of them is going to say Q&A. If you click on that, it'll bring up a window, and then you can ask your question at that point. So we'll then address as many as we can towards the end of the webinar. One of the big questions we always get in every webinar that we do is, are the materials going to be available after? So let me answer that now and say, yes, absolutely. They will be available after. What we basically do is put everything together over the course of 2 or 3 days after the webinar and send it on out. So what you can expect from today's webinar will be the presentation slides you're going to be seeing today, this video recording of the webinar itself, and also the white paper that Boa Compra has produced with the help of AMI as far as e-commerce in Latin America. All right, so let's move on to our legal notice here so you can get a sense of this, because this is something that I'm not going to read. As you can see, it's fairly long. It's something that we're obliged to read that talks about our attempts to verify the information that you're going to be presented here today, and the fact that we're not liable for any information in case it proves to be erroneous, and so on and so forth. I encourage you to read that at your leisure. I'm not going to get too much further into that because we want to devote the time to the actual material that we want to share here today. So this brings us now to our speakers. And I'm going to allow them to come on and introduce themselves one by one, and then we'll go from there. So let's start with Alain Delcourt. Alain.
Yeah, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Alan. I'm the managing director of Boa Compra. I've been doing that for the last 5 years. And Boa Compra serves international merchants with local payment solutions in Latin America. Both for pay-in and pay-out. We work for like a big range of merchants, big merchants, but also SMB merchants. So I'm happy to elaborate a bit about our experience.
Perfect, thank you, Alan. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Lindsay Lear. I lead the payments practice at America's Market Intelligence. And we partnered with Boa Compra to produce this study. Chock full of data. We're going to be presenting our analysis on e-commerce market size, forecasted growth, various industry segments and breakdowns. And we compile this data every year. We go through a very tedious and methodologically rigorous process to compile and update this data every year based on both desk research and interviews, transactional data from actual industry players to bring these numbers to you and get as accurate and clear picture of the e-commerce market in Latin America as possible. So we're looking forward to sharing these results with you. Before we get into the content, I want to go ahead, if you go to the next slide, launch a poll for all of you on our webinar today. We want to understand, what vertical do you work in? Please take a moment to answer this question. You know, more and more e-commerce is becoming a diversified segment of the industry in which new verticals are popping up all the time, including gaming, including various facets of digital goods, even new and niche segments of retail. So we'd really love to understand where you are. And you know, there's also the all-encompassing other category. So please take a moment to fill that out. And then we'll kind of have an understanding of who our audience is today. So we'll give it just about another 10 seconds. Okay, we can go ahead and close that out. Okay, so several others, I guess, I'm assuming PSPs and lots of folks from the payments industry. And then we have a fair amount of retailers and several, I'm curious, I would love to receive questions or comments from those in gaming and digital goods and even travel to kind of hear your experience over the past year and see if the data is resonating with you. And that would be great. I encourage you guys to ask questions and throw your comments in the Q&A as we go through the webinar. So thank you so much. Okay, so let's dive into what we're going to be talking a little bit about today. Latin America, right? When we, why Latin America and why now? Those of you who work in the region already know that it's a fascinating place to do business. When we look at Latin America compared to the global scale, you know, it's a small region compared to North America or Asia or even Europe in terms of percent of GDP and overall purchasing power. However, it is one of the fastest growing e-commerce markets in the world, one of the fastest digitizing regions in the world. And it has, of course, Brazil leading Latin America is one of the top 10 global markets for any international corporation. Latin America is also fascinating. You know, you have over 600 million people divided among more than 30 markets, all diverse and different in their own right, and all requiring an understanding of what's going on in that local market. And together as a region really represents an incredible opportunity for growth. So in 2021, we have a $266 billion market only in the top 6 countries that represent more than 95% of population and GDP. So we really do get representative numbers when we look at the top 6 markets. And we're going to be talking about a couple of key trends throughout the webinar. Launch of PIX and instant payment methods. This past year has been the year of the instant payment method of instant payment transfers. We're going to be talking about that in depth. Of course, increase in digitization. We're going to be looking at that in more detail. And the expansion of cross-border e-commerce and global merchants, which is kind of taking a place across all of the region. Okay, if we move on. Of course, the big question in everyone's mind over the past, you know, almost 30 months at this point is the impact of COVID. Now, we covered this extensively last year. We saw a dip in consumption overall, while a big migration to the digital channel. And the question, you know, in 2021 was, has this really sustained? Has this behavior been sustained? And what we can say is a resounding yes. We saw e-commerce grow 36% in 2021, and we expect sustained growth of 25% over the next several years. And what's most important to understand when we look at Latin America is how truly underserved the region was in terms of banking penetration prior to 2020, and how that has completely been transformed 2 years later. We had over 100 million people join the banking industry since 2019. And over 80% of the population are now participants in the digital economy. Not only consumers of digital platforms like social media, but participants in the digital economy, meaning having made a P2P transfer at minimum or made some transaction online. That's really remarkable. And that expands that 610 million people, that really expands the addressable market immensely and make Latin American consumers much more accessible to international merchants who want to engage with this population and who are seeking growth opportunities. So Alan, I want to pause and you know, do these regional numbers, are you seeing this reflected in Boa Compra? How have you guys seen your clients rebound after the pandemic, and how are they performing already in 2022?
Well, I think that economically, the region is almost fully recovered. We are back with freedom of movement now. We have higher vaccination levels. The growth, GDP growth differs a bit from country to country, like Colombia or Peru are having a strong growth trend, while it's a bit slower in Brazil or other big markets. Mexico too is still recovering slowly, but I would say that the pandemic is clearly behind, and we can feel it for the last 3 or 4 months. Boa Compra has a big footprint in processing payments for digital goods. So we had a very, very strong trend during the pandemic. For instance, with all the video game industry, because I remember my kid during the pandemic using a lot my credit card to purchase online, and now he's back to school. So we see a bit of a retraction now on this kind of a very pandemic sensitive vertical, I would say. And in the meantime, like life is back to normal for purchase of physical good and even cross-border purchases. Now China is also like fully operative. Brazilians they buy a lot of stuff from China, so we are not suffering for any kind of disruption in the supply chain. So physical good is clearly now back on track. Travel is still a bit sensitive. We feel obviously the effect of the war in Russia, the high prices of energy. It's very expensive for Latinos to travel abroad, buy an airline ticket. It's not exactly very easy economically. Local tourism is back on track, I would say, but like the volume of people moving to other regions for vacation, it's another story, right? And we are still, I would say, taking advantage of what you mentioned, Lindsay, like during the pandemic and the last 2, 3, or 4 years in Latin America, we saw a major move in digitization of people. Fintech was very hot, has been very hot. Massive investments, for instance, in Brazil, we've seen. And there was like a problem of an underserved population with banking products 5 years ago in the region. It's not the case anymore. Many neobanks got traction during over the last years. And I can take the example of PagBank, for instance. PagBank is part of the same economic group of Boa Compra. The group is PagSeguro. It's a massive group listed in New York, processing 10% of all payments in Brazil. And we launched in 2019 our own online bank. In 3 years, we were able to reach 15 million active users. Because the process of opening a bank account now lasts 5 minutes online, where it could last 2 weeks or even more 5 or 10 years ago, right, in Latin America. So these major improvements, plus I mean also new operations like COVID vouchers that the government in Brazil, for instance, had to distribute through neobanks, mostly to give in some benefits and some incentives to the population during COVID, made the ecosystem, the whole ecosystem of finance and payment in America very dynamic. So the trend, the growth trend that we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years is now consolidated, and this has a major impact on the importance of e-commerce as a whole in the region, right?
I love that insight, that it feels like with Pix and neobanks and other fintechs participating, money is just moving more easily. People have greater access, things are more agile and flexible, things are faster. And I think that's really helping to accelerate this industry.
Yeah, so there is a massive also disruption regarding real-time instant payments, and in Latin America it's mostly Pix, which is really the biggest case in the region. But I think we're going to elaborate a bit on that.
Exactly, absolutely. Okay, great. So let's move ahead and look at kind of the variety that we have in Latin America. Now, many of you who are already in Latin America are familiar with how varied and dynamic this region is. We have Brazil, a huge digital powerhouse, compared to Peru, which is a fascinating market. 2 years ago, very, very cash heavy, cash dominated, that has had one of the most rapid and exciting digital transformations in the region. You go to Chile, which has nearly 100% banking penetration, to Colombia, which due to vast geographic differences between mountainous regions and large urban cities still have some internet connectivity challenges, but nevertheless has really improved its internet penetration and e-commerce penetration in the past couple of years. So Mexico, of course, is a very interesting case. Huge country, number 2 in the region, shares a border with the United States, free trade agreement, easy to get goods in and out of Mexico, and in many cases is still lagging in terms of digital adoption in some cases. So each country requires its own approach and its own understanding to truly cater to consumers in each market. And Alan, I wanted to ask you something that you mentioned about Brazil just a moment ago, saying that, you know, Brazil perhaps is experiencing a slower recovery than other markets. Now, Brazil, I know for most global players, Brazil is a top priority. So can you elaborate a little bit more on what you're seeing in Brazil and what this slower recovery may mean for e-commerce merchants looking at Brazil? A little bit more color there would be great.
Yeah, I think we need to separate like economic trends and e-commerce trends in the country because those are very different. These moves at very different paces. We keep seeing e-commerce trends growing fast in Brazil. All the digital businesses of PagSeguro are booming. So I think it's a trend which going to stay and last for at least for the 5 years to come. I don't have any doubt about that. So I wouldn't worry too much about macroeconomics of the region. Brazil is obviously a very good entry point for the ones wanting to start something in the region for a couple of reasons. One is the huge population. So we have like a big market. It's obviously the biggest market in the region. Plus the finance industry in Brazil has always been a bit ahead of the other countries of the region for a couple of reasons. Back in the 19th, we were facing problems with hyperinflation, for instance, in Brazil. So we had to adapt, and banks they did massive investment back in the 90s to make overnight bank transfers or this kind of important feature. And so we are still a bit ahead. So somehow it's a pretty stable market with higher adoption of technology, of finance tools, and with a bigger e-commerce market compared to other countries in the region. So usually many merchants they start with Brazil. It's already a good chunk of the whole Latin America, and then they expand to Spanish LatAm, which is a bit more fragmented. And this is a recommendation I would give to most of the merchants eager to enter the region.
It's good to know, especially since that there's not necessarily a correlation between the digital economy and macroeconomics. You know, in the US right now, we're living in inflationary times, approaching a recession. And of course, the US economy always impacts on Latin America. So that's a great point to call out. Okay, so let's move ahead and get into the data around e-commerce a little bit more specifically. So here, there's a lot of data on this slide. Now, we've already been asked the question, will we share the slides? Yes, you guys will have all the access to the data as well as the white paper, which contains all of these insights. Important to keep in mind, big takeaways from this slide. This year, what we've done is separated out e-commerce into two additional verticals. We've pulled out ride hailing and delivery apps. We've pulled out digital goods, and we've pulled out other services. So we can even get more granular into the analysis here. Retail traditionally and continues to represent the bulk, little over half of all e-commerce spend. And the rest of it is an increasingly diverse set of goods and services. And we're going to be looking at each vertical specifically. We expect on average across the region 25% growth for the next 5 years. It's really amazing how the region has been able to sustain growth in excess of 20% over the past 5 years, and going through this tumultuous pandemic and resuming growth at this level. So again, really promising prospects for the next few years in Latin America. And we're going to speak about cross-border e-commerce specifically, but overall e-commerce growing at 25%, we expect cross-border to be growing almost 10 percentage points faster. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Okay, if we move ahead, let's take a look at retail in particular, okay? Driving force of e-commerce, increasingly diverse. We saw during the pandemic niche categories like supermarkets, groceries, everyday expenditure, really taking a larger share. Now that we're out of the pandemic impact, we've seen key categories like technology and fashion and clothing once again maintain their dominant position, as well as home and goods, furniture, and domestic electronics, things like that. And another really key trend when we look at retail is the importance of marketplaces, both domestic marketplaces, particularly in Brazil, that are surging full speed ahead, growing 70, 80, 90% a year when we talk to them about their e-commerce operations, as well as international cross-border merchants, marketplaces that are specifically targeting Latin American consumers. And this has been a trend over the past couple of years. And so, Alan, I wanted to ask you, we've seen a lot of interest specifically from Asian marketplaces targeting Brazil, targeting Mexico. Can you tell us a little bit about that trend? Why Chinese marketplaces or Asian marketplaces specifically are looking at Latin America?
Yeah, so we saw in Brazil, but also in the rest of Latin America, cross-border e-commerce starting at large scale maybe 10 years ago, right? And the entry point of merchants like AliExpress or others was basically to provide essential items, cheap ones, directly from the source. Latin American consumers don't have a very big purchase power, obviously, and doesn't compare to the US. It's way less. But the Latin American consumers, they will accept to have a pretty bad user experience if they were able to purchase these essential items for very low costs, right? So typically 10 years ago, you would start buying cheap stuff, sometimes worth $5 or $10 from AliExpress or other merchants, and you would wait 30 or 40 days until you get delivered. And sometimes you would have surprises at the moment of tax clearance in the country, because all the supply chain and tax clearance and compliance chain sometimes was a bit blurry, right? And this has improved over time because from that starting point, key merchants and marketplaces, as they sophisticated their offer, you can now get shipped by the big Asian merchants, sometimes in a matter of days or 1 week for some product categories. And I would say that the confidence of users, of end users, has been growing. And merchants from the West are now seeing that and starting to build, like I would say, more sophisticated offering more high-end products. We see the footprint of Amazon growing in the region, not only through cross-border commerce, but also like a step-by-step building their own warehouses in the region and doing a mix of cross-border e-commerce and domestic one. And I think the opportunity on the sweet spot for merchants from the West is exactly here. There is a demand rising for like more high-end products, and it's possible to offer these products in a way which is at the same time compliant and tax effective, I would say. It requires a bit of research. It requires the right partners because Latin America is always a bit complex, very blurry, doesn't work the same way as the US or Europe. But at the end, it's possible to have a strong compliance and to be effective. You need a bit of guidance, but this is basically what we see as a movement from Western merchants.
Got it. So it's interesting. I guess the Chinese or Asian players have been a little bit more willing to be aggressive in an environment where there was a lot of gray area. But now that has improved, and now Western merchants are getting a little bit more willing to play in this space as well. So that's very interesting. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead.
There's
to look
maybe
at.
a second trend I could mention. So you mentioned marketplace. So there was also like a first generation of marketplaces, mostly Chinese, also like proposing a connection between a Latin end user and a seller in Asia. And this is evolving towards more sophisticated structures, where a marketplace can also onboard like domestic merchants. So on these Asian marketplaces, you know, like can find some Brazilian or Mexican products more and more. This creates a lot of interesting situations for payment providers like us, because obviously it's a bit complex to take care about these hybrid flows of settlement, right? This is the kind of things we like to.
Exactly. Got it. Okay. Requiring even more sophisticated technology and understanding the region to really help companies operate successfully. Great. Okay, let's take a look into travel. Travel, of course, is the vertical that was most hard hit during the pandemic, and is still the one vertical that is underperforming with respect to 2019. Now, we have seen very decent recovery, especially domestic travel. We expect travel to continue to grow at around 30%, so rebounding in some cases more aggressively than other verticals, because of course it was really hard hit. So now it's starting to accelerate a little bit faster, but we're still seeing, cross-border travel at about half of what we saw pre-pandemic, and this is really being held back by lingering questions around whether there's going to be a new surge in the virus, vaccination levels, vaccination requirement and entry requirements, as well as corporate travel and things like that, that there's really been an evaluation how much travel is necessary now that we're all digital and able to communicate digitally. So, we're continuing to watch travel. Domestic has really recovered well, but there's still some way to go before we see volumes fully restored. Okay. If we take a look into next category, which would be ride hailing and delivery apps, of course, these guys are operating locally, kind of this hybrid version between digital and physical presence. Ride hailing really was hit hard during the pandemic and has rebounded since. Delivery apps, in many cases, grew 200, 300% in 2020 and continued aggressive growth in 2021. And what we're seeing is these players, having been empowered by the pandemic, really starting to innovate aggressively, move into new verticals, shorten their delivery times, and really focusing on delighting customers even more. We have, Rappi, for example, delivering select products in under 10 minutes, which is really remarkable. We also see a trend of marketplaces adding delivery service, food delivery service, restaurant delivery service, and increasingly this is a perfect example of increasingly the lines between physical and digital blurring, and really challenging the definition of e-commerce. What is a digital payment? And so really, this is a fascinating vertical to continue to observe. If we go to the next slide, digital goods is another vertical that has undergone transformation in the past couple of years, specifically around gaming and other forms of social interaction on the internet. Streaming and digital downloads have been strong in Latin America for a number of years, but we're really starting to see gaming take off. And I know Boa Compra is particularly strong in gaming. So, Ellen, I'd love to hear your perspective. What can you share with us?
Well, gaming is pretty specific in a couple of aspects. One aspect is games publishers, they use intensively digital currencies. So it's a challenge to tackle fraudsters, obviously, because with a digital currency, you can toy around and find some weaknesses sometimes if you are a fraudster. So this is something that we've been working on for a long time. Not easy, but no, we got it right. So, Boa Compra has been in the market for 20 years with video game publishers, so this we tackle pretty well nowadays. There is another question around this market, which is a market with big spikes. So video games is about sometimes pre-orders, it's about flash promotions, and you can expect to have like spikes of 5 to 10 times the normal volume of orders for a given hour or day. So you need a good infra, obviously. We rely on big infra here to be able to serve the whole market. Most notably and most recent trend is obviously NFTs. Because games is nowadays about like game monetization nowadays is a lot about selling skins in both mobile games and also sometimes on other platforms. Yeah, mobile is important. So obviously skins are very important. And like all the games publishers, they now are like designing their own NFT programs, because obviously once you have a skin, you want to have an NFT program, and that is very like very logic and very easy. So new challenge ahead, very interesting one, obviously, because it relates to this global trend of NFT, and we like that very much.
Okay, excellent. Very interesting. We'll talk a little bit about that a little bit more later on. And of course, digital currencies and NFTs is this entirely new space that we're all becoming educated on. So I guess I would ask as a follow-up, what piece of advice would you give merchants who don't understand NFTs yet, or digital currencies, or are afraid of them, or just don't even know where to start? What kind of insight can you provide?
And no, there are some companies specialized in designing NFT program and blockchain / crypto plus NFT programs for video game companies. So my advice would be to look a bit about what's going on in the Silicon Valley. I know a couple of companies who received major investment, able to provide a lot of inside tools, features, programs for any kind of games publisher nowadays. Okay. I think it's typically a global program that the publisher needs to build, nothing like a region specific. And then what is about the last mile is mostly about like user experience flow plus payment plus sometimes customer care. For these kind of topics, then you need to rely on a strong regional partner.
Got it. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, now if we move to our final kind of category here, other services. Okay, now this is the first year that we've broken out other services, just to show the vast variety of things that fall into other services and how the definition of e-commerce is expanding. This category includes things like education, not only online education, but actually parents paying for their kids' school tuition through an e-commerce gateway, or healthcare services, paying any kind of tax or fee or license online. This is actually a large category that is getting larger and more diverse. And actually, I'm going to jump to an audience question here. And Alan, I don't know if you have a response for this or not, but the question is there any insight or trend that you can see in the healthcare industry for e-commerce and or B2B transactions?
Cross-border e-commerce is a bit tricky when it comes to pharmacy items because there is a big screening from health authorities here, not only in Brazil, but in other countries of the region. So it's not the easiest category. I would advise to do some research about what are the products that can be imported without the proper stamp from the health authorities, and when a stamp is needed, how does it go? And not always very easy. I think it's the biggest hurdle that one might think of. And the domestic e-commerce is not exposed to that, obviously.
Mm-hmm. I would say that the biggest transformation we've seen has been a very strong entrance into e-commerce by pharmacies. pharmacies developing e-commerce stores, supermarkets, and convenience stores selling pharmaceutical products, over-the-counter products online, even prescription products. And that's an entire specific e-commerce niche. Telehealth has started to kind of emerge in niche areas, still an emerging trend, but I expect that will continue to grow. Okay, great. Let's continue on here. We've spoken a little bit about e-commerce trade, e-commerce, cross-border e-commerce, cross-border e-commerce, and how important it is to understand that it's growing actually faster than domestic e-commerce. Now, we had in 2020 and 2021, we actually saw a contraction or a stagnation of cross-border for several reasons. Interruption of supply chains, weakening of national currencies, impacting ability to spend online, and an overall contraction of spending overall. Typically, cross-border e-commerce are not essential products, and so in times of crisis, consumers are going to cut back. However, we've seen a powerful rebound of cross-border e-commerce, growing at 34%, and compared to 24% for domestic. And a couple of reasons for that. Again, Latin Americans are always looking for deals, and very often products found on the international market are cheaper than what's found domestically, as well as a larger product variety. Additionally, we have more and more merchants, and Alan mentioned Western merchants becoming more interested in Latin America, increasingly looking for growth opportunities. So we see, we expect this segment to continue to grow at a very exciting pace. Okay, across all of the verticals that we've mentioned. So if we move ahead, I believe we have a poll question. Yes. So we'd like to know at this point, talking about cross-border, are you guys, is our audience already selling to Latin America today? Let us know what your situation is. If you're already actively in Latin America, you're planning to in the near future, or you're not and have no plans to for now. Let us know your thoughts here. Okay, great. So let's wrap that up. Let's see what our results are. Okay, so we have the majority of our audience is already quite active in Latin America. We have a few folks who are new to Latin America and potentially learning a lot about the region. So excellent, terrific. Thank you guys for your participation. All right. So let's get into a little bit of discussion about payment methods. I know many of you came to learn specifically about some of these payment method trends, and we'll try to address this as best we can. Of course, Pix is the grand news in payment methods in Latin America. The Brazilian central bank real-time instant free P2P payment platform that is also being heavily adopted by merchants, governments, et cetera, for B2B and merchant payments. We've seen massive adoption of Pix. Over 75% of the Brazilian population is already using Pix. And within e-commerce, we've seen really remarkable results. So Alan, I'd love for you to tell us about this, since you guys have seen some really dramatic results with Pix already.
Yeah, we have. So as you said, it's a major disruption. For the audience to get an idea, Pix volume is now way bigger than credit card volume in the country. And it's also bigger than bank transfer volume in the country. So this is a revolution, as maybe WeChat Pay was a revolution some years ago in China. It's a very well-designed program, surprisingly well-designed program. It's managed by the Central Bank of Brazil. And so as the central bank saw this major success and adoption of this Pix program, it's been up and running for only 18 months. So it's still pretty recent. but central bank envisions to launch new features to push further the competition with traditional local payment methods. So, for instance, in Brazil, people do pay a lot in installments with their credit cards, and central bank will launch at some point PIX in installments, and that's probably very wise. Then they will launch recurring PIX at some point because this will compete with for all the recurring and subscription economy with traditional payment methods again. So when you think about in the e-commerce industry, the payment method landscape before PIX, it was typically credit card plus cash-based payment methods plus a bit of wallets. So among cash-based payment methods, we have a popular payment methods called Boleto. PIX already cannibalized totally Boleto. We see that here, for instance, in our volume in Boa Compra, Boleto is not relevant enough. It's not very relevant anymore, I would say. And credit card volume is shrinking now, right? Especially because we process payments for a lot of merchants of digital goods, some of them with very low average tickets and targeting a young population. So for some of them, we see PIX accounting for more than 50% of our volume. So in a nutshell, if there is one advice to crack the Brazilian market for foreign merchant, start thinking PIX first. Then obviously you need complementary payment methods like a credit card, to some extent some wallets. Like we have our own wallet here from our mother company called PagBank wallet. And the cash-based payment methods are less and less relevant, I would say.
That's fascinating. I haven't heard it put that way quite yet. Think PIX first and then think about credit cards. That is a huge shift. And that's a very powerful statement. So, you know, that's really
for the ones who don't understand PIX or maybe didn't get an exposure to PIX, as an end user, it's pretty easy. You use one of what we call the PIX keys. It can be your social security number, for instance, or even an email or phone number, and you register this number to your bank account. So you can register one key per bank account. For instance, I have 3 bank accounts in Brazil. I use 3 PIX keys, right? And then at the moment that you need to receive cash, you just give your PIX key to the payer, and you get settled directly to your bank account. And if you need to pay, basically, you can just, through bank account, scan a QR code on any kind of merchant site, for instance, and pay instantly. Mm-hmm. So that's real time, that's 24/7, and that's convenience. Like the user experience is really good of that.
Excellent. Okay, terrific. Thank you. Let's go ahead. I think we have some more discussion around local payment methods, and you know, the trends here to following PIX, which has been the leading trend, right? There are other local trends that we need to keep in mind, and that folks have a lot of questions about, right? First is, you know, one just fact to understand is that when you are accepting credit cards locally as opposed to offshore, we're seeing credit card authorization rise from around 30% when you're transacting offshore to 70% on average, but this can go up to high 80s and 90% for some merchants and some merchant verticals. So authorization rates are already performing very well in the region when you're processing credit cards locally. A couple of other just trends to touch on briefly, because we get a lot of questions about them. Buy now, pay later. Of course, installment payments have been around in Latin America for decades. It's nothing new. Paying with your credit card and being able to finance that over 12 up to 24 months. The region has seen in the last 6 months, kind of an explosion of buy now, pay later fintechs that are integrating with merchants to enable installments using a debit card or a bank transfer or any non-credit card payment method. This is important to watch, not relevant yet, representing around 1% of all e-commerce, but something to watch as, of course, buy now, pay later has really hit big in the headlines internationally, and something to really watch to see if this will become a disruptive trend or not. And the other question I want to address is cryptocurrencies. Now, Alan talked about blockchain, NFTs, digital currencies, and what we're observing is that the use case and the application of blockchain technology for e-commerce is really taking place in the gaming atmosphere in the impending metaverse. Cryptocurrency for actual purchases is very limited, still a very long way from widespread merchant acceptance. There are a couple of kind of niche examples here and there, but crypto we say is really not a payment method you need to think about enabling in the near term. Would you agree with that, Alan?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And maybe in a complementary note, just to clarify regarding local credit cards, when we refer to local credit cards, I see in Lindsay, you're also mentioning, for instance, local Visa or local MasterCard, right?
Correct,
so
correct.
This is
Not just, yes, exactly.
This is a bit subtle, but we have many Latin American users who don't have their credit card enabled for international payments. So they cannot do a purchase in dollar in a given e-commerce site. And they can only pay for stuff which is like in local currency. Mm-hmm. And the processing has to be local. And in most of time, the merchant will propose payment in installments, because we are kind of BNPL native here in Latin America. We've been paying in installment for decades. And all of a sudden, the rest of the world discovers that BNPL is an interesting trend. And from there, these industries started to be more widespread worldwide. So that's.
Well, let's go to the next slide, because I think that will detail this even more. On this slide, we actually break out, there's a lot of data on this slide, so you guys will get this as a reference later, but what Alan is really speaking to is the importance of domestic-only credit cards here, which refers to Visa and MasterCard, which cannot be used for international purchasing, as well as local card networks, specifically in Brazil, but also in other markets. And so when we remove internationally enabled credit cards, which are the only payment method that can be used for offshore processing, when we remove that, the rest represents 78% of total e-commerce volume. And so as an international merchant, if I do not have a local payment processing strategy, I'm forfeiting access to 78% of the pie. And so, this is a major component of the industry that we want to really get across, is not only local payment methods like Pix, but local credit cards, which are so important to be able to capture and process to give your customers a good user experience, a successful user experience, and one that they feel comfortable with, and that gives them the confidence to continue purchasing. You'll also see, the breakdown of payment method, debit cards, cash vouchers, digital wallets. You can see they're all kind of distributed. After credit cards being the major share, we have a series of local payment methods, and that is going to change. What I really want to highlight is that today, in 2021, only 1 year after the launch of Pix, we had already bank transfers across the region representing around 13% of total e-commerce, up from 1 or 2% the year before. Okay. By 2024, 2025, we expect that to represent 40% of the market. So this is a very important trend to get on board with, whether it's Pix in Brazil or other instant payment methods across markets, the other markets in the region. This is a huge transformation that's taking place in Latin America and globally. Let's forge ahead as we're, I do have some questions I want to get to from the audience and make sure that we're covering all of our content here. This slide just goes into a little bit more detail about the acceptance of local payment methods in Latin America. We get into a little bit more detail at the country level. And on the rise of instant payments, we call out a couple other examples. Botón PSA in Colombia, really a champion for bank transfers in Colombia. We're starting to see this emerge in Argentina with Transferencias 3.0. Mexico is, I see a question about CODI and SPAY in Mexico. CODI, which would be the PIX equivalent for Mexico, is still very underpenetrated, still has not really taken off for e-commerce. We can have more conversation about that offline. In Chile, we see payment method Kipu really pushing and driving bank transfers. So this is something to really get well educated on and making sure that you are enabling the payment method that is most relevant for your customer, that they're going to want to pay with and have a successful e-commerce experience. Okay, if we go ahead, of course, there's always a lot of questions about regulation. And we've talked about real-time payment infrastructure being driven by the central bank. Two things I'd like for you to touch on, Alan, in the last kind of few minutes that we have today. One is on open banking. We know that open banking, in alignment with interoperability of bank accounts and instant transfers, open banking is a big part of this. So what can you tell us about that? And also, can you give us some advice on managing and navigating kind of the complex tax rules that we see across the region?
Yeah, so about open banking, all countries are moving at their pace. Again, I think that Brazil is a bit ahead of other countries of the region in starting to be really fully operational for bank interoperability as it is designed. So we entered what we call phase 3. Phase three is a phase where all the financial institutions holding more than 500,000 accounts need to register as payment originators. And the PSP, we want to become payment initiators, can start processing transactions through the originators. Right, so it's starting. It's now up and running. There are few payment initiators in the market to date, but the ecosystem is structured. And for instance, PagBank, obviously, we have 15 million active users, account holders. So we are a payment originator. The user experience, which is designed here, is like from the perspective of an e-commerce end user. The end user could originate from the PSPs, the merchants from the merchant's PSP could originate a transaction, then ask, for instance, if the end user has an account with Santander, let's say, the PSP would require a payment origination to Santander, and then the end user will complete the transaction with Santander, in my example, right? There's a question around whether this user experience is better or worse than a PIX experience. And to our understanding, maybe the PIX experience is better. But there are some merchants moving and trying to compare what this open banking could bring as new experiences if compared to PIX. So this is an interesting trend analysis to follow. And you mentioned something else about the tax rules. So in a nutshell, tax is complicated in every country of the region. It's different, sometimes moving in different directions. So my guidance here is like find a payment partner able to process, collect, remit to you abroad if you don't want to get incorporated locally. And this partner will guide you a bit through the complementary requirement that you need in the region. But it feels complex, but it's not that much once you get guidance. And this is what we do with Boa Compra. And with a good partner, you can easily plug and play. And if you are a merchant, you integrate to a payment service, and you can easily process payment and get settled everywhere in the world. So this industry is now pretty stabilized, and and very effective.
That's like everything, right? You know, looking for the local,
you need to be up to date.
Yeah, exactly. The local expert that can help you navigate. Really
or
opens up.
if you are a very big merchant, if you are Amazon or a big Asian marketplace, you might consider getting incorporated locally, but it's complicated. It takes time and etc. So this would not be my recommendation for SMBs.
Great. That's a great insight. You know, how and a lot of merchants we see going into the region through a partner to get familiar with the region, get acquainted with the region, and then you kind of evaluate your strategy from there. But at least to take advantage of the growth that we're seeing in Latin America as a first step.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, terrific. So I think if we go on to the next slide here, we're on to kind of our final comments, and I think we've said a lot of this already. You know, top best practices for going into Latin America and what to keep in mind. Of course, localization in an increasingly competitive market, providing the most localized and comfortable experience for the user is of course very important, whether that be currency, language, payment methods, customer service and communication, and delivery of delivering a localized high quality experience end to end, of course, is very important. And Alan, I want to ask, you know, just as in our last couple minutes here, and I'm going to throw in a question from the audience here. Can you give us your final tips, your final thoughts regarding entry into Latin America, and specifically for small businesses, for SMBs? Is Latin America too risky? Is it too difficult? What additional advice can you give to SMBs who want to?
Yeah, from the perspective of an SMB company, I would say first, be confident. The market will keep growing in Latin America. There's an interesting statistics, Lindsay, that you brought into a white paper. Is like e-commerce accounts for 12% of total retail sales, right, in Latin America, I think. And this is going to grow. We see that other markets have already like a bigger share than that. And we're pretty sure that it's going to grow to maybe a projection is 22% within 5 years. Oh, there is a massive growth still to be expected. And yeah, the other advice, and maybe to state it once again, is like Latin America is a bit scary because it's not very steady. It's bumpy road sometimes. But once you get local guidance, you can be confident that you get continuity, and all the complexity can be tackled locally if you have the correct setup. So don't underestimate a region which is accounts for 10% of the total population of the planet, more or less, with a big trend of e-commerce growth for the years to come. It's an interesting market. People already have like some pretty sophisticated, people already have access to pretty sophisticated products and services. They use car sharing. They use most of the services of the gig economy, but not all services. So there is still a lot to explore.
Okay, got it. So thank you, Alan. Abel, if we move to the last slide, just to highlight the white paper. Just to remind everyone, if we go one more, I want to remind everyone that those of you all of you who participated today will receive a copy of this full report, which has all of the data as well as additional insight and data we weren't able to get to today. So watch your inbox for that. And if you do have to sign off, please feel free. Thank you for being with us. I do want to take a minute or two to answer a couple final questions. And one that I think is just a super important practical question, Alan. Tell us what you think. The question from Juan Carlos is, how important is it to have localized Spanish on your website? You know, for Argentina, for Mexico, for Chile. Currently, we have generic Spanish. What's your opinion on that?
Stage one is to have one version of Spanish, but it might feel a bit weird for Latinos. Like Spanish from Spain is, in terms of vocabulary, is a bit different. Argentina is a very specific country in Latin America in terms of language too, right? So we see, for instance, in Netflix sometimes subtitles in Spanish from Spain, Spanish from LatAm, and Spanish from Argentina and Uruguay. So there are several versions of Spanish within Latin America. So see how deep you want to be in bringing comfort to the end user when it comes to language. Having 3 versions of Spanish, I think it's good.
Okay, terrific. Hopefully that was helpful. Kind of an incremental approach, right? First generic, and then as you get more sophisticated and involved, having that localized approach is recommended. Okay, terrific. And we're having some more questions pile in, so we'll take just a couple more minutes for those of you who can stay with us. An important question about the state of gaming in Latin America. Alan, we talked about it briefly, but can you describe a little bit more the state of gaming in Latin America? Are players spending less time and less resources into their games now that the pandemic restrictions have been lifted? Or do you see this being a continuing growing trend?
We see a natural retraction of the time spent by users, and purchase of in-game items obviously is shrinking a bit. This is expected. Like, kids are back to school, teenagers are back to school, people are back to work in premises. So it's very natural to expect. One very important trend about gaming also is the platform, which is used by the Latin users, the Latin players. We see Asia is mobile driven. Here it's a bit more fragmented. Like, consoles are important, PC games are important, and mobile games are important. The trend is like mobile game is gaining a bit of ground, but it's not taking all the business. So you need to toy a bit around this concept of when you can have like a multi-platform games. Also, it's interesting in the region. And don't get me wrong, the volume we see now might be lower than what we were seeing at the spike of the pandemic, but it's way higher than what we have before the pandemic. So it's a thriving market.
I also think we've seen a trend in an increasing variety of users of gaming. Pre-pandemic was pretty niche, right? Mostly male, mostly a specific age group. Now we see more kids, teenagers, and even young kids, more women, even older.
You started to play Candy Crush maybe during the pandemic,
here and there, possibly. So really fascinating. So I think we've addressed most of our questions here. Please feel free to follow up directly with myself or with Alan after the webinar. We'll be following up with all of the webinar materials. Thank you all very much for being with us, and we'll hope to see you soon. Take care.